So welcome everybody and good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's webinar organized by EURO-NMD in collaboration with the European Academy of Neurology and R&D for rare neurological diseases. This session marks the third episode of the EURO-NMD webinar series, Management and Treatment of Myopathies. So today we have the Professor Muntoni. So little presentation. He is a leading expert neurologist pediatric specializing in neuromuscular disorders. He is the director of the Dubovitz Neuromuscular Center at UCL, where he oversees both clinical care and research. His work focuses on understanding the genetic causes of disease like Duchenne muscular dystrophy and spinal muscular atrophy, and on developing initiative treatments. In addition to his clinical and research roles, Professor Muntoni co-directs the MRC Center for Neuromuscular Diseases and leads the Development Neuroscience program at ICH. Thank you very much, Professor Muntoni, for uh, giving this webinar today, and the floor is totally yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and for the colleagues who are on the line, I do apologize because there is an idiosyncrasy between my computer and Zoom. I promise I know how to do full screen sharing, but it does not work with Zoom. And so I believe you should still be able to see, big enough for you to see the slide. And so I will give, before I start, this is my disclosure. As you can expect, I work with a number of companies involved in clinical trials, but I don't have any direct financial, if like, advantage for one product or the other. So I'm reasonably unbiased, although I do provide some consultancy for some of these companies. I will talk about four aspects in this 3/4 of an hour or so. The first is where we are regarding microdystrophin gene therapy for Duchenne. I understand that you will all have understanding regarding some of these conditions, so I'm not going to go deep into what Duchenne is and what limb-girdle muscular dystrophy are. There will be just one or two slides, but I think this is really on how the field is evolving regarding therapeutic option. Towards the end, I will also draw your attention and regarding the safety consideration when dealing with AAV gene therapy. This particular seminar is not to give you a deep understanding and knowledge regarding everything that potentially could go wrong when you give an AAV gene therapy. At the same time, I think it is important to also consider that gene therapies are very effective and very potent therapies, but they also require an understanding what may go wrong so that you are more or better prepared to deal with potential adverse event. Just as a very brief recap, it is used for in all these therapies.
Sorry, Professor, we cannot see the slide moving.
It's really...
Yes, we can see it moving. I think you have to click on the slide.
So I need to go out and click on the slide.
Yes.
Okay. So can I ask a question? Do you see a difference between like this and like this or not?
Only the pointer.
Only the pointer. Okay, so then I stay, it's even easier. I stay in this, and maybe I can even make it slightly bigger. Let me see. Maybe you should see it slightly bigger like this.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, this is UCL and Zoom. They have a bigger conflict of interest than mine and this company. And so AAV gene therapy is used because AAVs are they exist. They are very prevalent in the general population. To some extent, this is a limitation because people of my age will probably have already been exposed to a number of these AAVs. So not necessarily I would be eligible to receive an AAV gene therapy, because if you develop antibodies against these AAV, that's a problem. But in younger children, this exposure is much less. And this is a non-pathogenic virus, so it does not cause disease. That's why I don't know if I've been exposed to AAV. And there are a number of genes inside this AAV that are largely removed, and you fit inside this gene whatever you want in this in viral vector, whatever you need to make it produce what you want, not what the AAV wanted to do. A limitation is that the size of what you can put is not infinite and is approximately 4.6 kilobases. And therefore, it depends on what is the size of the gene you want to put, on how this is feasible. This is the next slide, and this is just to give an idea that there is not a single AAV, and in actual fact, this slide now will be a little old, but there are several naturally occurring viruses, one AAV virus, and again, from 1 to 10, and also with some hybrid species. Now, there is a lot of work to try to increase the repertoire by engineering, by, if you like, putting your hands on the viral and the capsid composition to improve specificity of where they go. Of the serotypes that exist, some have a preference for, I make an example, brain, some have a preference for heart, and so on and so forth. And therefore, there is these have been used to target different tissues, because you cannot, you try to maximize the use of the AAV. And these are examples of both nerve and muscle condition where AAV are in current use. And if I move to the next slide, one problem for Duchenne, again, I do not have slides to tell you again, the Duchenne is a progressive condition affecting only boys. The problem is that the gene is too big to be put into an AAV. And nature gave us a, if you like, an escape, because there have been people with a milder form called Becker muscular dystrophy who had already very large deletions, missing nearly 50% of the gene, that although they are not normal, they had mild problem, they were still walking late in life, and therefore this is very different from having Duchenne, where usually loss of ambulation is in the early teens. And therefore, taking this into consideration, there have been different efforts to try to see which parts of the gene or the protein you can cut, being inspired to some extent by this family. And there are different aspects, different transgene have been prepared, and I have another slide on that. And largely by removing some of these spectrin-like repeat, they work a little like the spire of a spring. So you can remove many of them without completely removing the function of the dystrophin protein. And this is 2025 to demonstrate that there are, on the left-hand side, the companies that are developing some of these. On the center here, which vector is being used. Here, the promoter, meaning the the AAV will not know where you want dystrophin to be expressed, and therefore you need to put, for example, a creatine kinase promoter as an example, or a myosin heavy chain promoter, and here, and these are the name. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 companies. Although one, as you hear in a second, has had to terminate the program. And this is, the idea is quite similar, that you largely remove some of these spectrin-like repeats at the same time to squeeze the dystrophin protein to a point that can be fit into the AAV vector. At the same time, you can also appreciate that not every company is using the same identical recipe. So it's like, pizza done in different ways, but and I think little by little there will be increasing information on whether one pizza is better than another and whatever, or they all work in the same way. I'll start from the first of the drugs developed by Sarepta, not because of anything else, but because this is the data that have been published. There is a paper that has been published in Nature Medicine perhaps 6 months ago that give this result of what happened once you do this in patient with Duchenne, using, as you can imagine, this is what I shouldn't have, I forgot to mention. Once you give AV, you can only give it once because you're like vaccinating people against that particular AV, and therefore is a single infusion. There is a, in this study was a placebo-controlled study, so a proportion got the gene therapy, a proportion got the placebo, and then after 1 year, whoever got the gene therapy got a placebo and vice versa. So the first year was published. And these are the example of whether it did work or not in terms of how much dystrophin it made. And as you can see, there was not every single patient did a biopsy, but all the patients who had biopsy had a decent level of dystrophin with the mean and the median here. So there was variability of this, and maybe some patients had very little, and some patients had much more. But I think this is a respectable level. And this is what was measured in these children. And these were children who were between the age of 4 and 8, if my memory is correct, or 9. And there was a primary endpoint that was one functional score called the North Star. Then there was additional key secondary endpoint, time to rise from the floor, and 10-meter walking test, but also additional information such as, for example, this complicated thing as V95C means stride velocity 95th centile. This is a digital biomarker, is captured with a very sophisticated Apple Watch. Is actually not an Apple Watch, but is to give an idea what is the time you spend on the 95th centile of what you can manage. Now, unfortunately, the primary endpoint here is on the right-hand side. This is the treated patient, and these are the untreated control. And as you can see, both improve at week 12, 24, 36, 52, compared to baseline. The treated patient improved more, but the difference was not statistically significant. So this was a disappointment. At the same time, the other secondary endpoint that are both the time to rise, the 10-meter walk, and the 95th centile all demonstrated nominally significant improvement. And I think that here, if you have all this, this is the primary endpoint, the North Star, as you can see, overlaps with 0, so is not statistically significant, as it is not statistically significant, the 100-meter walk test. But all the others do not overlap with a 0, and in particular, the time to rise from the floor shows slowing time in the placebo, but less time in the treated patient in a way that is clinically meaningful. Of interest, perhaps, there is the observation that the stride velocity that was in the interim approved by EMA, European Medicine Agency, as a potential primary endpoint for clinical trial, was also significantly improved. And I think the result had been published, and this led to FDA approval for the ambulant children and the conditional approval for the children with Duchenne who have stopped walking. I think that's quite important because, and we may discuss it later on, the information of the strength and limitation of this drug are really on the children who can still walk. And there is at the moment very little information on the children who do not walk. And I'll come back to this. These are data that have been presented quite recently at the Muscular Dystrophy Association meeting, the MDA. The one on the right-hand side are the 2-year result, meaning at this point in time, the problem is that there is no placebo anymore, and therefore we need to compare data with an external control cohort. And if you do this time, both the North Star, the time to rise, the uh, the 10-meter walk test, and both in second and in velocity, they were all favoring treatment compared to children who have an external control who did not have the drug. And you can see here the difference between for example, in this case, is the North Star. The North Star is how many points. It's better to have more points than have less points. So the children treated at more points compared to the untreated children. At the same time, the time to rise from the falls is better to rise quickly. So you want a low number here compared to the time of the external control. And just a few weeks ago, another important information regarding the potential of this drug to do something is the quantitative muscle MRI data that were published separately, indicating that compared to untreated patients who were in this color, the amount of damage accumulated during the course of the first year was much less. So this was this is still the patient receiving either the placebo or the drug. So I think this is unbiased data, and as you can see, the untreated patient got more damage. The treated patient got either less damage or the inaction factor improved, less damage compared to, but still some damage, but not as much, or they even had a reduction of the original damage that was identified. I think I move now to an important point related to the fact, and I'll come back again towards the end of this presentation, to the fact that the gene therapies need to be respected in terms of the adverse event. And there were adverse events in the EMBARK study. These were largely relatively moderate, let's say. Nothing is mild. But I think there were vomiting, nausea. There was liver involvement in terms of transaminitis in a number of patients, but no liver failure and no very severe adverse events requiring, for example, prolonged hospitalization. However, and in the meantime, of course, in the States, the drug has been approved for commercially. So more than 800 patients have received the drug. But in March or in April, one child in the, 16-year-old young man receiving the drug as part of the commercial product in a non-ambulant state died. And I think this, and very, very recently, just a few weeks ago, another child in the non-ambulant ongoing clinical trial died as well as a result of severe liver disease. And I think this, if you like, and some editorials and that have appeared very, very recently, last few weeks, leads to, if like, the importance of considering the pros and cons for gene therapy, especially in the non-ambulant people with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, where there is very little evidence at the moment. So I think if you are counseling family for risk-benefit, it's more difficult when there is no yet any evidence of benefit. So I think the clinical trial of the non-ambulant is on hold as of the last few days. And I think that we will need to see how it will start again, maybe with heavier immunosuppression. We'll discuss it. Leaving now the Sarepta gene therapy program, this is a very similar program of another company called Pfizer. This study was called the CIFREO clinical trial. It is also a phase 3 clinical trial. Some patients received placebo, some received the drug. The ratio is 2 to 1 in this study. And the age range is not fundamentally different from the one in the previous study. I think the data were approximately a year ago became available, and this was a big disappointment for the field because on the top is the difference between the placebo patient and the treated patient regarding the primary endpoint that was one functional score, the North Star. So this is, if you like, you will remember in the cerebral study, there was no statistically significant, but there was some separation. Here there appears to be essentially no separation. But also other key secondary that were clearly separated in the Sarepta trial, such as the 10-meter walk test and the rise from the floor velocity, show no difference at all. And this is a surprise because the level of dystrophin that was in this patient who had a biopsy was quite respectable, if anything, even higher than the one in the previous clinical trial that I demonstrated. So I think that we may discuss later on why this could be the case. I think that what happened to that product is that there were, during the clinical trial, a little more problems compared to what happened in the previous study, for example, with thrombotic microangiopathy and several patients with thrombocytopenia, but also in separate clinical trials. One young person, 5-year-old boy, and in a separate trial, another, I think it was 15-year-old man died. And because of the lack of efficacy, therefore, and this death, Pfizer discontinued the program because the risk benefit was really not in favor of taking this program forward. Regarding other programs for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, currently there are trying to get it. Yeah, currently there are 3 more programs that are recruiting as we speak. One is the Geneton in Europe, but it will start to recruit also in Europe, and this use an AV8. Then there is Regex Bio, also using an AV8 that is currently recruiting. And then there is a company that Solid Bioscience that in the past had a program just maybe 4 years ago, but then they interrupted the program because it was not really working well enough, and they went back to the drawing board and came back with a different capsid, a different viral vector, and I think they started to dose patients, mostly in the States, but this trial is moving in Europe now. So this is enough for Duchenne. And move now in limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. I explained that I will not have the physical time to give you a lot of background. I assume you have information regarding what limb-girdle muscular dystrophy are, but I think from a molecular perspective, if you, I was talking about dystrophin until now. Dystrophin is this red molecule that is under this plasma membrane. It's called sarcolemma, and dystrophin links to a number of proteins called sarcoglycans. And there are 4 sarcoglycans, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, that when mutated by autosomal recessive mutation, cause limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And probably not unexpectedly, as the role of this protein is not fundamentally dissimilar for dystrophin. The phenotype is not very dissimilar for dystrophin deficiency. And many years ago, for example, in North Africa, there was a very common or relatively common form that, however, also affected girls and therefore could not be Duchenne because Duchenne is X-linked. That was called Duchenne-like. And this was due to mutation in alpha sarcoglycan. And I think it's very difficult to clinically distinguish alpha, beta, gamma, and delta from each other. There are 2 companies that are doing at least to the best of my knowledge, if I forgot some companies, I apologize, but there are at least two companies that are taking forward the clinical trial for limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And here you have Sarepta and AskBio. Sarepta is the one that has got more, if you like, is more advanced because it started earlier with different sarcoglycans having now finished the preclinical development, but enter the clinical program. Sorry, these are the two sarcoglycans. I apologize. Also, two out of the three. There is a fourth one, but the fourth one is so rare that at the moment there is no intention to start to use them. There is also another limb-girdle muscular dystrophy that is due to deficiency of a gene that is not a sarcoglycan gene, but is a glycosyl transferase called FKRP, fukutin-related protein. That what it does help to glycosylate alpha-dystroglycan, that is another of the protein linked to dystrophin. And this kind of antennas that you see here are the part of the glycosylation that this FKRP does, and there is a mutation in one of these genes called FKRP that causes limb-girdle 2I, or also known now, because of change of nomenclature, limb-girdle 2B, that both Sarepta and another company, AskBio, are pursuing, and they are in the clinical phase. There is not much that has been released so far because these are relatively small ongoing studies, but this is the data that I could find from Sarepta regarding the limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. This is beta sarcoglycanopathy, and I think that they are, if you like, these are the baseline data of the patient receiving either this particular dose or this particular dose of sarcoglycan. As you can see, some of these patients are not, they are, these are the age of these children, between the age of 4 and 13. And this is some of the this has been released a few years, maybe 2 years ago now. I could not find any more recent information. But I think this is the, if you like, what was the change from baseline in terms of improvement. So I think after 6 months, there was improvement of the North Star. There was in the cohort 1, this is with the lower dose, but there was better improvement with all these outcome measure in the higher dose cohort with both the North Star, time to rise, the 4-stair climb, the 100-meter walk test, and the 10-meter walk test. So I think that currently these studies are ongoing with also the other sarcoglycan, and I think we are waiting to hear more information on how these are going. I think that the last of the condition I will talk about is myotubular myopathy. This is the only slide that gives you, just because it's a even more rare condition, this is the only slide that gives you a sense of how patients look like. This is a severe condition. Respiratory insufficiency is the norm in the first year of life, or sometimes the first few months of life. And as you know, you may appreciate this boy is also another X-linked condition. This boy cannot sit unsupported, so mom is holding him sitting, and is also holding the hand, because it is, and you can appreciate the very floppy nature of this child. It's quite a severe condition. These children eventually do not acquire motor milestone. The majority of them, for example, don't acquire sitting, and some may acquire sitting, but it's not common. But walking or it will be not typical at all. And one company called Astellas did a clinical trial, and using another AV, this was a AV8, and this is an external control versus the treated patient on one functional scale. That's called the chopping band. A very similar scale is also used in spinal muscular atrophy. And one thing that was amazing is that compared to the untreated patient that, as I said, never acquired new milestone, the treated patient very significantly improve in the functions of their muscle. This is not a small improvement in 48 weeks. So this is a year. There was an improvement of 20 points of the Chopin 10, but also there was improvement of the ventilatory dependence with less and less hours spent being fully ventilated, and a few patients, if my memory is correct, but here I may need to be able to check, double check, may have even discontinued the ventilator, but this I need to double check. And I think just to make it a little more tangible in terms of the improvement for each of the patient, and these are the different cohorts of the two doses, there are the number of children who have acquired. I make an example. I'm not going to take you through every single one, but how many children have acquired and how long it take. The length of this bar is how long they've been followed since the dose. And I think in this particular case, this child has been able to walk and can climb stairs. This child is walk and climb stairs. This child only walks. This walks and climbs stairs. This where can I find these and other children have only acquired sitting. Not everybody acquired walking. This only acquired sitting. This only acquired sitting. So I think that this is unprecedented based on the natural history. However, unfortunately, there was a very severe, nearly explosive liver involvement in a proportion of this patient, and 4 children died as a result of this gene therapy. And at the time, the sponsor designed the study, and not only the sponsor, in truth, none of us investigators had much information regarding the fact that there may be significant liver involvement, even if you do nothing, in myotubular myopathy. And I think that there was this very clear paper that demonstrated in children, but this is after this study was done. So, the sponsor had no idea. You can look at this date of when the fourth child dies is September 2021. This paper was published more than a year afterwards. So I think we are learning that there is liver involvement even if you do nothing. And of course, if you have already a predisposition and your liver is not strong enough, that's a bad news to give gene therapy, because the gene therapy will go to the liver. And I think that this is part of the same paper that demonstrated that there is indeed in children who have not received gene therapy, there is, if you like, um, mostly canicular cholestasis and with periportal and bile ductal reduction, and the liver therefore is more prone to be pushed into severe pathology if you also give an insult like AAV gene therapy. And this was found, beta study, there is a very elegant paper a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, by the group of Jim Dowling that demonstrated in zebrafish model that indeed there is liver involvement in zebrafish model. The point here is that what he did demonstrate, that if in the zebrafish you put back microtubulari MTM1 not only in muscle but also in liver, this improves. So this is very interesting because, of course, the gene therapy that I showed before, use a promoter that drove production of the transgene only in muscle, because this is a desmin promoter. So desmin promoter will not um, produce NTM1 in liver, but only in muscle, and therefore uh, that may have contributed. But again, this is sad, but this is learning. So the last 10 minutes or so will be on, I'm an enthusiastic user of AAV gene therapy, but I also became a more knowledgeable. I'm not very good. I don't want you to think I'm very good, but I'm better than was when I was 5 years ago when we started in terms of understanding what can happen and how you need to monitor patient. I think that there are a number of publications where I think this is not unique of Duchenne, tubular myopathy, and so on. Of course, if you have a predisposing reason, the chances are higher. So tubular myopathy appears to be a particular problem. However, essentially for any disorder that receives this very high dose of viral gene therapy, death has been observed, including in spinal muscular atrophy. So I think that there is one aspect related to AAV gene therapy is dangerous for you, potentially. But of course, if you also have a predisposing liver disease and so on, the risk of developing problem is even bigger. So these are an example of why we see problem after gene therapy in general. The first is that the amount of capsid that we give in the circulation, this is still a viral vector, although it does not replicate in the whole body. And although it does not have viral protein, but it still has the capsid. The capsid is what targets the muscle, and this capsid has got foreign proteins. Therefore, your immune system will not like it. There is, for some condition, I'm not going to go into this, some cells do not like to have too much external protein produced, even if this is good protein, but there is a limit and a proteinopathy can come. And then more importantly, because of this external protein, different type of immunities will trigger trouble. And I discussed before, this is specific predisposing factor in tubular myopathy, the liver. Just to give an idea of how much we give of these AAV gene therapies to people with any of these conditions, these are 50 to 100 times higher level than a typical childhood immunization, and they're given intravenously. So I think these are significant protein, capsid protein load that therefore may not be such a surprise that there is robust immune reaction. And I think what I have summarized in these slides are a few events that may occur in people with Duchenne muscular, with any AAV gene therapy. And I identified a number of examples. For example, peri-infusion event that they occur, on the day of the following 1 week after the infusion. Examples here of what they would be, and in different color, the frequency and severity. Red means very severe. So if you have common, for example, common means that is common and not severe. Extremely rare means that this is very rare, but can also be very severe. So I think that in peri-infusion event can be nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, and some evidence of cardiac involvement occasionally with lethal cardiogenic shock. I need to move this here physically because my animation are not working. Shortly after the first week, there can be the innate immune response to the viral capsid may kick in, and this can cause low platelets, but also activation of complement and with thrombotic microangiopathy. And what this will lead to is liver injury, low platelets, thrombotic microangiopathy with kidney injury, some potential increase in cardiac enzyme. And you can, on the right hand side, you can, liver injury, for example, is typically very common. I think is almost invariable. Usually is mild, sometimes is moderate, sometimes can be very, occasionally, rarely can be very severe. Low platelets is common. It's very rare that it becomes a very severe problem, But thrombotic microangiopathy is very rare, but if you do not look into it, it can be quite severe. And I can move this. Then, if you like, you're not over, because after a period of time, around 3 months, there can be a second bout, 2 to 3 months, of liver inflammation that is relatively common, is not extremely common, but occasionally can be quite severe. And then there may be later on even other type of adverse events, sometimes triggered against the transgene, uh, in case this is a protein that the body never saw before. There may be theoretically response against the protein we give. And the last few slides is to give you a sense of this would show animation, but if I go into animation, I'm not sure you will be able to see it, but of the timeline in terms of days of when, but you have here the paper, the timeline of where after infusion, what happens in terms of both adverse event or enzyme that will suggest adverse event, but also what is the underlying mechanism. I make an example. This is ALT, AST, that is the liver enzyme. In this arm, they may start to raise at this point in time, and then the platelets may start to decrease already after a few days. These are days after dosing, and may go quite down, and then they tend to go back to normal. Then you have that if you like, there may be complement activation that will start at around day 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. So you have that, and then eventually the immunoglobulin, the response to the transgene becomes very robust in the circulation, but it is typically the bigger problem, or especially the early innate immunity is a problem in the first 2 weeks, 2 weeks and a half. Then I think the second problem is that of the acquired immunity that will start to kick in at a later dose. I think protocols have been examined regarding the possibility to either use only corticosteroid, and I forgot to say corticosteroid are used invariably at the beginning of the trial and usually up to 2 to 3 months after the trial, and then they discontinue. But I think they may not be enough to blunt this response. And some study, for example, this particular study of this investigator used a combination of different immunosuppression in addition to steroid to try to blunt or to reduce the activation of the immune system. I think a manuscript that I contributed to was published 2 years ago regarding, if you like, more pragmatic things of when to look at what with, if you like, a more clear timeline of when things may be abnormal and what you could look into it, and also some potential for therapeutic option in case some of these aspects occur. So if you're ever going to be involved in AV gene therapy, don't think that it's as easy as finding a vein and putting in the circulation. The majority of the patient will do well, but we are here for every single patient, not only for the one who do well. So this is my last slide, and I think I am convinced that despite some criticism, some of the program with microdystrophins are leading to benefit from patient. But of course, we will need to see for how long they will stay and help the patient. And also, we still have little idea of whether they will be as effective in people who have already lost ambulation or not, and therefore the risk benefit in those children need to still be a study in clinical trial. The death, there are ongoing clinical trial for limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, but we don't have result yet. And because of the tubular myopathy gene therapy trial death, that particular program is on current hold. I think there is discussion of the company of whether this could be started again, perhaps using a different immunosuppressive regime. But there continues to be this concern about the liver involvement. And as I indicated, adverse event not uncommon, and therefore they are much better presentation than the one that just gave you in general, to be prepared if you will be involved in gene therapy, to make sure that you can do the right thing for your patient. And I think if you feel this is a bit exoteric, because you may not be considered to be involved in AV gene therapy, because your specialty is a different one, I can guarantee that in a few years' time, the number of AV gene therapies that will be available also for neurological condition is going to be so large that if you want to be at the cutting edge of pediatric neurology, you really need to understand uh, what I explain and do a deeper dive. And this is my last slide, and is to thank who work in the Dubovitz Neuromuscular Center. This is Victor Dubovitz, who will be 94 next, well, in a few months' time. And this is my team. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take question, and I stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Professor Muntoni, for this presentation. So we have one question from Onur Kakir. So he said, "Hi, thank you for this wonderful webinar. My question is related to news below. Researchers from University College London have jointly received £1 million to develop potential treatments for congenital muscular dystrophy as part of our partnership with LifeArc. And based on Prof. Ayan Zhu's statement, this funding will be used to develop transformative RNA therapies for collagen 6 related congenital muscular dystrophy called 6 CMD. Is there a progress on this particular research?"
Yeah, so I think that so those are two slightly different programs because they do not use AAV gene therapy. And the second one is a program where we are uh, like targeting specific mutation of collagen 6. And we have, collagen 6 in muscle is is produced by fibroblasts, the muscle interstitial fibroblasts. So you need a different strategy, and we're using antisense oligonucleotides, similar to what had been also used in Duchenne, but a different type of chemistries, to go to those particular cells and try to restore the ability to produce dystrophin. So, sorry, collagen 6, I apologize. And there are different types of mutation. I think while in Duchenne, macrodystrophin would potentially work for all, people with collagen 6 tend to have different mutation. They can be dominant or recessive. So we're using different strategies depending on which mutation they are. And we're doing this also in collaboration, for example, with colleague at the NIH with Carsten Bonneman. And I think this program is moving forward. We will present some data at the World Muscle Society. In fact, we just had one of our piece of work in collaboration with Carsten Bonneman has been accepted as an oral presentation of World Muscle Society in a few months' time. Regarding the first program, that is taking advantage of the unique observation of a patient who had a very, very unusual phenotype, uh, and the discovery of a very likely gene modifier, and therefore how to mimic what this gene modifier does in animal models of laminin alpha 2 as a proof of concept that this could be useful for patient as well. So we're moving. I mean, this the second project only started, last month. So there is very little project, very little progress so far.
Thank you for the answer. So far, we don't have any question. We can wait a couple of minutes.
think the most important thing is colleagues, if they were able to take some of the reference to go back, and especially if they were considering, my message is the sponsors will tell you what to do if you were involved in a clinical trial and so on, but it's still very useful to have deeper knowledge of why you need to check things at that particular point in time. There are a number of very good publications, not necessarily my publication, where, if you like, what are optimal management, optimal time point to look, how long your patient need to be close to where you do the infusion, and how often you need to see him in the first week, 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. All these things, and why you check the blood for what. But more importantly, what you do in case there is an abnormality. And from my perspective, I'm a pediatric immunologist. My immunology is not great. I'm getting better, but you know, for me, the most important thing has been that of setting a multidisciplinary team with cardiologists, renal specialists, with immunologists, to make sure that when we use these therapies, um, if I run into trouble, I can ask colleagues to help, because I will not have every single expertise regarding, thrombotic microangiopathy is not my primary specialty, quite frankly. There are much better people than me here in my hospital.
Thank you very much, Professor Muntoni, for this presentation. I think we will close the webinar for today. And I think if someone have question, they can always send us an email and we will transfer it to Professor Muntoni. So thank you very much. Have a great end of the day and see you maybe in another webinar.
Thank you again. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.